The official report listed her as killed in action. Specialist Kenna O'Yelleran, destroyed by enemy fire during convoy ambush, Paktika Province, Afghanistan. The paperwork was already filed. The condolence letter was already drafted. What the United States Army did not know was that Kenna was very much alive, dragging herself through a drainage culvert 3 kilometers from where her captors were still searching for her body. Her ribs screamed with every movement. At least 2 were cracked, maybe 3. The knife wound on her forearm had stopped bleeding hours ago, but the sleeve of her uniform was stiff with dried blood. None of that mattered. What mattered was the 8 kilometers of hostile territory between her and friendly lines, and the men with rifles who wanted her dead. She paused at the culvert's edge, listening. Wind across rocks. Distant voices shouting in Pashto. The sound of a truck engine maybe a kilometer to the south. They were still looking. They would keep looking until they found her, or until she made it home. Kenna closed her eyes and let herself remember, just for a moment, how it all went wrong. 12 hours earlier, she had been sitting in the third vehicle of a 5-truck convoy rolling south on Route Copper. She was the only sniper attached to the supply run, there as overwatch in case of contact. When the convoy commander, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Vickers, briefed the route, she had raised her hand. "Sir," she had said, "the Karangal crossing is a known ambush point. Intelligence flagged increased activity there last week. Recommend we take the alternate route through the valley." Vickers had looked at her the way a man looks at a fly buzzing near his food. "I do not make tactical decisions based on female intuition, specialist. We are running the planned route." Dismissed. Before we continue with this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you know someone who has shown incredible determination when everyone else had given up. The ambush hit exactly where she said it would. RPGs struck the lead and rear vehicles simultaneously, boxing them in. Small arms fire erupted from the ridgeline above. Kenna had her rifle up and was returning fire when a third blast flipped her vehicle onto its side. She remembered crawling from the wreckage. Remembered seeing Corporal Whitmore motionless in the driver's seat, half his face gone. Remembered the hands grabbing her from behind, the blow to her head, the darkness that followed. She woke in a compound with her wrists bound and her equipment gone. 5 men stood around her, speaking rapidly in Pashto. One of them, younger than the others with a wispy beard, kept gesturing at her and laughing. She did not need to speak the language to understand what he was suggesting. They left her alone for 6 hours. That was their mistake. Kenna had spent those hours working the rope against a broken edge of the wooden post behind her. When the young one returned alone, presumably to claim what he thought was his prize, her hands were free. He never saw the strike that crushed his windpipe. He was still gasping on the ground when she took his knife and slipped through the window into the darkness. Now she was 3 kilometers out and still moving. The night air was cold at this elevation, and her body was beginning to shake. Shock, exhaustion, blood loss. She needed water. She needed rest. She needed to keep moving. The culvert opened into a dry stream bed that wound northeast toward the mountains. Kenna followed it, staying low, using the rocks for cover. Her brother had taught her to move like this years ago, during summers at their grandfather's farm in Oklahoma. Deo had been 5 years older, already Army, already planning his career. He used to say that the difference between living and dying in combat was usually just one thing: the willingness to keep moving when your body begged you to stop. Deo had died in this same province 2 years ago, IED on a routine patrol. Kenna had enlisted 3 months later. She touched the dog tags hanging beneath her uniform. 2 sets, hers and his. She had carried his tags through basic training, through sniper school, through every deployment. He was with her now, in this stream bed, in this darkness, pushing her forward. A sound froze her mid-step. Voices. Close. 2 men, maybe 50 meters ahead, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Kenna pressed herself against the stream bed wall, making her body small, controlling her breathing despite the pain in her ribs. The beams swept past. The voices faded. She waited a full 5 minutes before moving again. By dawn, she had covered another 2 kilometers. The mountains loomed ahead, promising harder terrain but better cover. Behind her, somewhere in the growing light, the men hunting her were finding the trail she had tried so hard to hide. In a compound 4 kilometers south, a man named Rahim Khosravi stood over the body of his nephew. The boy's throat was crushed, his eyes still open, his expression frozen in surprise. Khosravi had raised this boy after his brother died, had trained him, groomed him, prepared him to lead. Now he was meat on a dirt floor. Khosravi knelt and closed the boy's eyes with gentle fingers. Then he stood and turned to the men gathered behind him. "Find her," he said in Pashto. His voice was quiet, controlled, and absolutely terrifying. "Find her and bring her to me alive. I want to look in her eyes before I take everything from her." The hunt was no longer about an escaped prisoner. It was personal now, and Rahim Khosravi had never failed to find what he was looking for. The sun rose merciless and bright, turning the Afghan landscape into a furnace of rock and dust. Kenna had found shelter beneath an overhang, a shallow depression in the hillside that offered shade and concealment. Her body demanded rest. Every breath sent fire through her cracked ribs. The knife wound on her forearm had begun to throb with the unmistakable heat of early infection. She allowed herself 30 minutes. No more. While her body rested, her mind worked through the tactical problem. She was approximately 6 kilometers from Forward Operating Base Warhorse. 6 kilometers of mountain terrain controlled by men who wanted her dead. She had no weapon, no radio, no water, and no food. The only advantage she possessed was that they did not know exactly where she was. That advantage would not last long. She thought about the convoy, about the soldiers who had died because Vickers refused to listen. Corporal Whitmore, who had shown her pictures of his newborn daughter just that morning. Sergeant Pelletier, who was 3 weeks from retirement. Private First Class Okonkwo, no relation to her despite the Nigerian surname, who had been telling terrible jokes for the entire drive. All of them gone because one man's pride was more important than one woman's warning. Kenna had learned early in her Army career that being right was not enough. Being female in a combat unit meant being right twice as often and still being believed half as much. She had stopped expecting fairness years ago. She simply did her job, kept her head down, and let her record speak for itself. Her record was exceptional. Top marks in sniper school. Battalion record for longest confirmed kill at 2,100 meters. 3 deployments with 0 disciplinary issues. None of it mattered when a man like Vickers looked at her and saw only what he expected to see. The 30 minutes passed too quickly. Kenna forced herself upright, biting back the groan that wanted to escape. Movement was survival. Stillness was death. She worked her way along the hillside, keeping below the ridgeline, moving from cover to cover. The terrain grew steeper as she climbed toward the mountain pass that would lead her north toward the FOB. Every step was calculated. Every shadow was evaluated. Every sound was analyzed. 2 hours into her movement, she found the boy. He was perhaps 10 years old, lying in the shade of a destroyed vehicle that looked like it had been there for years. Soviet era, probably one of the countless wrecks that littered this country like bones. The boy was conscious, but clearly injured, his left leg bent at an angle that made Kenna's stomach tighten. Their eyes met. His widened with fear. Kenna held up her hands, showing them empty. She approached slowly, speaking in a few words of Pashto she knew. "Peace. Friend. Help." The boy watched her with the wariness of a wounded animal. He did not cry out. Children in this part of the world learned early that noise attracted danger. Kenna knelt beside him, examining the leg without touching. Broken, probably from a fall. He had been here for hours at least, judging by the dried tear tracks on his dusty cheeks. No water, no shade except what the wreck provided. She could leave him, should leave him. Every minute she stayed increased her risk of discovery. The boy was not her mission. Her mission was survival, reaching the FOB, reporting what happened. Kenna pulled off her outer uniform top and fashioned it into a shade cover, propping it to shield the boy from the direct sun. She had found a small amount of water pooled in a depression in the rocks earlier that morning, enough to dampen her uniform. Now she squeezed what moisture remained from the fabric onto the boy's cracked lips. His eyes never left her face. He did not understand what she was doing or why. He only knew that this stranger, this enemy, was helping him. Kenna pointed north, toward where she knew a village lay. She mimed walking, pointed at his leg, shook her head. Then she pointed at the sun, mimed it moving across the sky, pointed north again. Someone would come. Someone would find him before nightfall if he stayed in the shade, if he conserved his strength. It was all she could do. It was not enough, but it was something. She left him there and continued north, trying not to think about whether he would survive. War made every choice into an impossible calculation. Save one life or save your own. Complete the mission or follow your conscience. Kenna had made her choice. Now she had to live with it. The mountain pass came into view by mid-afternoon. Kenna found a position among the rocks and studied the terrain ahead. The pass was narrow, a natural choke point. If Khosravi's men were smart, they would have people watching it. She spent an hour observing. No movement, no glint of metal or glass. Either the pass was clear or the watchers were better than she could detect. A sound made her heart stop. Static. Radio static, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere nearby. Kenna followed the sound, staying low until she found the source. A body, Afghan National Army by the uniform, dead for at least a day. His radio was still clipped to his vest, still powered on, still cycling through frequencies. She grabbed it with shaking hands and began scanning channels. Most were silent. One carried Pashto chatter she could not understand. And then, finally, blessed and beautiful English. Warhorse Base, this is Reaper 26, requesting status on QRF availability. Over. American voices. Her people. Safety. Kenna keyed the transmit button. Warhorse Base, this is Specialist O'Yellerin, call sign Shadow 7, requesting immediate extraction. How copy. Over. Static. Dead air. She tried again. Warhorse Base, this is Shadow 7. I am a survivor from the Route Copper Convoy, requesting extraction. How copy. Over. Nothing. She checked the radio, found a problem immediately. The transmit function was damaged, the button physically broken. She could receive, but not send. She could hear people, but could not reach them. Kenna sat back against the rocks and allowed herself one moment of despair. Just one. She felt it wash over her, cold and heavy, the weight of everything that had happened crushing down on her chest. Then she reached beneath her uniform and touched her brother's dog tags. Deo's voice came to her from memory, from a conversation they had years ago when she was still in high school, still uncertain about her future. He had been home on leave, sitting on their grandfather's porch, watching the Oklahoma sunset. The world will try to break you, Kenna, he had said. It will take everything you have and then demand more. The only question that matters is what you do when you have nothing left. That is when you find out who you really are. Kenna opened her eyes. She clipped the useless radio to her belt anyway. Even one-way communication was better than none. Then she rose to her feet, ignored the screaming of her ribs, and began moving toward the pass. Behind her, somewhere in the valley she had crossed, Khosravi's men found a blood-stained bandage caught on a thorn bush. The trail was fresh. Their quarry was close. The hunt continued. The pass was a death trap. Kenna realized at the moment she entered, the rock walls rising on either side like the jaws of some ancient beast. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to find another route, but there was no other route. The mountains here were impassable except through this narrow corridor. She moved in short bursts, sprinting from cover to cover, pressing herself into shadows and crevices. The afternoon sun cast long shadows that worked both for and against her. They gave her places to hide, but also created dark pockets where enemies could wait unseen. Halfway through the pass, she heard them, voices echoing off the stone walls. Pashto, sharp and urgent, coming from somewhere ahead. Kenna froze against the rock face, her heart pounding so hard she was certain they could hear it. She scanned for options. A narrow crevice to her left, barely wide enough for her body. She squeezed into it, ignoring the agony as the rough stone scraped against her wounded arm. Two men appeared around the bend, rifles slung across their chests. They were talking casually, not searching, just patrolling. Kenna held her breath as they passed within 3 meters of her position. Close enough to see the sweat stains on their clothing. Close enough to smell the tobacco on their breath. One of them stopped. He turned, looking directly at the crevice where she hid. Kenna's hand moved to the knife she had taken from the compound, the only weapon she possessed. If he saw her, she would have to be fast. Take the throat first, then deal with the second one before he could raise his rifle. The man stared for a long moment. Then he spat on the ground, said something to his companion that made them both laugh, and continued walking. Kenna did not move for 5 full minutes after they disappeared. When she finally extracted herself from the crevice, her entire body was trembling, not from fear, from the adrenaline that had flooded her system with nowhere to go. She continued through the pass, slower now, more cautious. The voices she had heard suggested a larger presence ahead. Khosravi was smart. He had anticipated her route and positioned men to intercept her. As she neared the far end of the pass, she found a sheltered position among the rocks and listened. The radio on her belt crackled with distant American traffic, routine communications that told her the FOB was still operating normally. They had no idea she was alive. No idea she was fighting her way home. A new voice cut through the static, speaking Pashto. Kenna did not understand the words, but she recognized the tone. Command authority. Someone giving orders. She adjusted the frequency slightly and caught fragments of another conversation, this one in accented English. The American woman. She killed Farzad. Khosravi wants her alive. A second voice responded. She cannot have gone far. The pass is blocked. We will find her before nightfall. The first voice again, lower now. You did not see what she did to Farzad. His throat was crushed. She did that with her bare hands. Be careful with this one. Kenna allowed herself a grim smile. Good. Let them be afraid. Fear made men hesitant, and hesitation created opportunities. But the mention of Khosravi's name sent ice through her veins. She had heard that name before in intelligence briefings at the FOB. Rahim Khosravi, regional warlord, Taliban affiliate, known for his patience and his cruelty. He had been fighting Americans for 15 years and had never been captured or killed. The men who hunted her were not simple militants. They were experienced soldiers led by a man who knew exactly what he was doing. And she had killed his nephew. The weight of that realization settled on her shoulders. This was not going to end with her escape. Even if she reached the FOB, Khosravi would not forget. He would wait. He would plan. And eventually, he would come for her again. One problem at a time, she told herself. Survive today. Worry about tomorrow when it comes. The sun was beginning to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and red. Kenna needed to move, to clear the pass before full darkness made navigation impossible. But the enemy presence ahead made direct movement suicidal. She studied the rock walls surrounding her. Steep but not unclimbable. If she could get above the pass, she might be able to bypass the blocking force entirely. It would cost time and energy she could not afford, but it was better than walking into an ambush. The climb nearly killed her. Every handhold sent fire through her injured arm. Every pull upward compressed her cracked ribs until she saw stars. Twice she slipped, catching herself at the last moment, her fingers screaming against the rough stone. By the time she reached the top, her vision was swimming and her breath came in ragged gasps. She lay flat on the ridge, letting her body recover, watching the last light fade from the sky. Below her, she could see the far end of the pass where Khosravi's men had established their blocking position. Flashlights were beginning to appear as darkness fell. They were settling in for the night, confident that their quarry would have to come to them. Kenna smiled despite the pain. She was already past them. The northern slope was gentler than the southern climb. She descended carefully in the growing darkness, using the stars to navigate, moving toward where she knew the FOB must be. Her body was failing. She could feel it in the weakness of her limbs, the fog creeping into her thoughts. She needed water, food, medical attention. She needed rest. She found a shallow cave as the last light disappeared, barely more than a depression in the rock, but enough to shelter her from the wind. Inside, she allowed herself to collapse. The radio crackled. American voices discussing supply manifests, patrol schedules, the mundane business of a forward operating base that had no idea one of its soldiers was dying in the mountains 5 kilometers away. Kenna fumbled with her brother's dog tags, pressing them against her lips. She was so tired. So incredibly tired. "I'm coming home, Deo," she whispered. "I promise." She did not remember closing her eyes. When she opened them again, gray dawn light filled the cave entrance. She had slept for hours, deeper than she intended, burning time she did not have. And when she looked down at the bandage on her arm, she saw the red streaks radiating outward from the wound. Infection. Blood poisoning. She had days at most before it killed her, assuming Khosravi did not find her first. Kenna forced herself upright, swaying on unsteady legs. The FOB was close now. She could make it. She had to make it. She staggered out of the cave and into the morning light, and somewhere behind her, voices began shouting. They had found her trail again. Kenna ran. There was no other option now, no careful movement from cover to cover, no tactical patience. The shouting behind her grew louder as she scrambled up the rocky slope, her infected arm burning with every swing, her cracked ribs turning each breath into a small agony. The terrain worked in her favor. The mountain slope was a maze of boulders and ravines, impossible to navigate quickly without knowing the ground. Kenna did not know it either, but she was lighter and faster than the men pursuing her, and she had spent years training for exactly this kind of movement. She created distance through sheer will, pushing her failing body beyond every reasonable limit. By the time the sun had fully risen, the voices behind her had faded to silence. Either she had lost them or they were being smart, hanging back, waiting for her to collapse. The ridge appeared without warning. One moment, she was climbing through scattered rocks. The next, she was standing on the edge of a cliff overlooking a vast valley. The sight below stopped her cold. American vehicles, Humvees and MRAPs arranged in a defensive perimeter at the valley floor, maybe 3 kilometers from her position. Soldiers moving between positions, the distant pop of gunfire, the unmistakable chaos of a unit under attack. Kenna dropped to her stomach and crawled to a better vantage point. Her sniper training took over, her eyes automatically calculating distances, identifying positions, reading the tactical situation unfolding below. The American unit was pinned. Enemy fighters held the high ground on 3 sides of the valley, pouring fire down into the defensive perimeter. She counted at least 60 enemy positions, maybe more, all with clear lines of sight to the trapped soldiers below. The Americans were returning fire, but they were outgunned and outpositioned. Without support, they would be overrun within hours. She pulled the damaged radio from her belt and cycled through frequencies until she found their channel. Warhorse Base, this is Reaper 26 Actual. A woman's voice, strained but controlled. We are combat ineffective. Requesting immediate air support and QRF. How copy? Static. Then a male voice, distant and bureaucratic. Reaper 26 Warhorse Base. All air assets currently tasked to priority operations. QRF unavailable at this time. Recommend you consolidate defensive positions and await relief. The woman's voice crackled back, and Kenna could hear the barely contained fury beneath the professional tone. Warhorse Base, we have 11 wounded and are taking fire from 3 directions. We cannot hold this position indefinitely. Request you escalate to higher command. Over. Reaper 26, we are aware of your situation. All available assets are committed elsewhere. Continue to hold. Warhorse out. Kenna stared at the radio in disbelief. She recognized that dismissive tone. She had heard it before from Vickers, right before he led her convoy into an ambush. Somewhere in that FOB, someone was making calculations about acceptable losses, deciding that 42 American soldiers were not worth the resources required to save them. She looked down at the valley again. The defensive perimeter was shrinking as the enemy pressed closer. She could see soldiers dragging wounded comrades behind cover, medics working frantically in the open, officers trying to coordinate a defense that was slowly collapsing. A young soldier broke from cover, sprinting toward a fallen comrade. Enemy fire tracked him across the open ground. He dove behind a disabled vehicle, dragging the wounded man with him, and Kenna found herself holding her breath until he reached safety. She could not hear what he was saying, but she could imagine it. The same words every soldier said in moments like this. "Hold on. Help is coming. Stay with me." Help was not coming. The radio had made that clear. Kenna's hand moved unconsciously to her brother's dog tags. Deo had died in a valley not so different from this one. Ambushed, outgunned, waiting for support that arrived too late. She had read the after-action report 100 times, memorizing every detail, torturing herself with the knowledge that her brother had spent his final moments believing rescue was on the way. These soldiers believed the same thing. They were holding their positions, conserving ammunition, doing everything right, trusting that the system would not abandon them. The system was abandoning them right now. Kenna scanned the valley with fresh eyes, no longer as a survivor seeking escape, but as a sniper assessing a battlefield. The enemy positions were well chosen, but not invulnerable. The commanders directing the assault would be at the rear, coordinating movements, maintaining communication. If she could identify and eliminate the leadership, the attack might falter long enough for the Americans to regroup or for actual support to arrive. The problem was distance. Her current position was nearly 3 kilometers from the valley floor. She had made shots at 2,000 meters before, but 3,000 was beyond anything she had ever attempted. Beyond anything most snipers had ever attempted. The wind alone would push a bullet meters off target at that range. The variables were almost impossible to calculate. Almost impossible. Not completely impossible. She searched the terrain around her and found what she was looking for. A flat rock formation jutting out from the ridge. Natural cover with a clear line of sight to the valley below. The angle was steep, the distance extreme, but it was the only position that offered any chance at all. Her rifle was gone, lost in the ambush. She had no weapon, no spotter, no equipment. She was injured, infected, exhausted, and alone. The rational choice was obvious. Continue to the FOB, report what she had seen, let someone else handle it. Kenna looked down at the valley where 42 Americans were fighting for their lives. Then she looked at the enemy positions surrounding them and saw something that changed everything. A glint of metal at the far end of the ridge, maybe 500 meters from her current position. A body sprawled among the rocks, and next to that body, the unmistakable outline of a rifle. She began moving before she finished the thought, crawling along the ridge toward the fallen fighter, toward the weapon that might give her a chance to do something impossible. Behind her, the sound of gunfire in the valley intensified. Time was running out. Below, in the chaos of the defensive perimeter, First Lieutenant Yolanda Bright grabbed her radio and broadcast one final plea. Any station, this is Reaper 2-6. We are being overrun. Request immediate assistance. Any station, please respond. No one answered. The dead man was Taliban, his chest torn open by what looked like artillery shrapnel. He had been dead for at least a day, his body stiff and cold, his eyes staring at nothing. Kenna did not spare him more than a glance. Her attention was fixed on the rifle beside him. A Dragunov SVD, Soviet-era sniper rifle, 7.62 millimeter, effective range around 1,300 meters in trained hands. Not ideal for what she was planning, but it was a precision weapon and it was here. She checked the magazine. 7 rounds remaining. She searched the body and found 1 additional magazine. 10 more rounds. 17 shots to save 42 lives. She moved to the firing position she had identified earlier, the flat rock formation overlooking the valley. The stone was cold against her stomach as she settled into a prone position, adjusting her body until the rifle felt like an extension of herself. Old instincts took over, the muscle memory of 1,000 hours on the range, 100 field exercises, 3 combat deployments. The scope was zeroed for a different shooter, but she could work with that. She adjusted the elevation, compensating for the steep downward angle, then began calculating the variables that would determine whether her shots found their targets or vanished uselessly into the Afghan dirt. Distance to the valley floor, approximately 2,900 meters, nearly 2 miles. The current world record for a confirmed sniper kill was 3,500 meters, achieved with a specialized rifle, match-grade ammunition, a train spotter, and ideal conditions. Kenna had a battlefield pickup weapon, unknown ammunition quality, no spotter, and a body that was slowly dying from infection and exhaustion. The rational part of her mind listed all the reasons this was impossible. The wind alone would require constant adjustment. The bullet would be in flight for nearly 4 seconds, during which any change in conditions would push it off target. Her hands were trembling from fever and fatigue. The scope magnification was insufficient for precise aiming at this range. She pushed the rational voice aside and focused on the battlefield below. The enemy commander was easy to identify. He stood behind a rock formation on the eastern ridge, directing fighters with confident gestures, occasionally raising binoculars to observe the American positions. He moved with the assurance of a man who knew he was winning, who believed himself untouchable. Kenna settled the crosshairs on his chest and began her calculations. Wind speed, 12 knots from a northwest, gusting to 15. She would need to aim nearly 3 meters to the right to compensate. Elevation, 400 meters above the target, requiring significant scope adjustment to account for the steep angle. Coriolis effect. At this distance, the rotation of the Earth would push the bullet slightly. Temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, all factors she could only estimate. Her brother's voice came to her again. From the summer, he taught her to shoot on their grandfather's farm. You do not have to be the best, Kenna. You just have to be good enough when it matters. She exhaled slowly, letting her heart rate drop, feeling the space between beats where perfect stillness lived. The crosshairs drifted with her breathing, with the minute tremors in her exhausted muscles. But she had learned long ago to work within imperfection rather than against it. The trigger broke clean. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and time seemed to stop as she watched through the scope. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. At this distance, she could actually track the bullet's flight, a faint distortion in the air marking its path. For seconds, the enemy commander's chest exploded in a red mist. He dropped without a sound, dead before his body hit the ground. Kenna allowed herself one breath of relief. Then she moved to the next target. The enemy fighters reacted with confusion, not understanding what had happened. Their commander had simply fallen. No sound of shot had reached them yet, the bullet traveling faster than the noise it created. They clustered around the body, shouting, pointing in random directions. Kenna fired again. A second man dropped, this one a fighter who had been directing a machine gun team. The others scattered, finally understanding they were under attack, but still not knowing from where. The sound of her shots reached them now, but the echoes off the valley walls made it impossible to pinpoint her position. She used their confusion, working methodically through priority targets. The machine gunner, a man carrying an RPG. Another who seemed to be coordinating communications. 5 shots, 5 kills. The radio on her belt crackled with frantic American traffic. Reaper 2-6, this is Overwatch position. We have unknown, friendly, engaging enemy from the northern ridge. Say again, unknown, friendly sniper providing support. Lieutenant Bright's voice cut through the chaos. All stations, I do not care who it is. Whoever is up there, keep shooting. Reaper elements, use this cover to reposition. Get the wounded to the casualty collection point. Kenna adjusted her position slightly, ignoring the fire spreading through her infected arm. The enemy was beginning to adapt, fighters going to ground, seeking cover from a threat they still could not locate. But cover from above was different from cover at ground level. Positions that protected them from American fire left them exposed to her elevated angle. She found another target, a man sprinting between positions with a radio pressed to his ear. A coordinator, someone important. She led him by nearly 4 meters, accounting for his movement, the wind, the impossible distance. The shot took him the spine. He pitched forward and did not move again. Reaper 2-6, the Overwatch voice called again. Confirmed kills at 2,900 meters. I repeat, confirmed kills at 2,900 meters. Whoever this shooter is, they are operating at world-class level. Lieutenant Bright's response was immediate. Then let's make sure they have something to work with. All Reaper elements, suppressive fire on enemy positions. Give our Guardian Angel room to operate. The American fire intensified, coordinated now, purposeful. The enemy was caught between two threats, the Americans below and the Phantom Sniper above. Their assault began to falter. Kenna chambered another round in search for her next target. 17 shots to save 42 lives. She had used 7. 10 remained. And somewhere in the chaos below, a young private named Tomasz Kowalczyk pressed himself against the hull of a disabled vehicle and prayed to a god he had not believed in since childhood. He did not know who was shooting from that ridge. He only knew that for the first time in 3 hours, he thought he might actually survive. The rifle cracked again, and another enemy fell. The battle had transformed. What had been a systematic slaughter was now a desperate scramble, enemy fighters abandoning exposed positions, their coordinated assault fragmenting into chaos. Kenna continued her work with mechanical precision, each shot a calculated equation of physics and instinct. Shot 8 took a man, setting up a mortar tube. Shot 9 eliminated a spotter who had been directing fire onto the American medics. Shot 10 dropped a fighter attempting to flank the defensive perimeter from the west. 10 shots, 10 kills, 7 rounds remaining. The Americans had recognized the shift in momentum. Lieutenant Bright was everywhere on the radio, directing her soldiers with renewed energy, exploiting every gap that Kenna created. The wounded were being consolidated, defensive positions strengthened, ammunition redistributed from the dead to the living. Kenna paused to let her rifle cool and scan the enemy positions. They were adapting, going to ground, minimizing exposure. Fewer targets presented themselves now. The easy kills were finished. What remained would require patience. Her radio crackled with a new transmission, and she nearly dropped the rifle when she heard the words. Unknown sniper on Northern Ridge. This is Reaper 2-6 actual. I do not know who you are or how you got there, but you have saved American lives today. Can you identify yourself? Over. Kenna stared at the radio. The transmit function was broken. She could not respond, but hearing Lieutenant Bright's voice, steady and grateful, sent a wave of emotion through her that she quickly suppressed. There would be time for feelings later. Right now, there was work to do. The lieutenant continued. If you can hear me, we are attempting to establish communication with Warhorse Base. They have denied 3 requests for support. Said all assets were committed to priority operations elsewhere. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried an edge of bitter fury. They wrote us off. Whatever happens here today, I want you to know that. Someone at that FOB decided we were acceptable losses. Kenna's jaw tightened. She thought of Vickers, sitting safely behind the wire, making decisions about who lived and who died based on convenience rather than duty. The same man who had ignored her warning about the ambush. The same man who had gotten her entire convoy killed. She pushed the anger down and refocused on the battlefield. The enemy had established a new command position, partially concealed behind a rock outcropping on the southern ridge. She could see movement there, multiple figures conferring, one of them gesturing toward the northern ridge. Toward her position, they had figured out where she was. Not precisely, but close enough to be dangerous. As if to confirm her assessment, a burst of machine gun fire tore through the rocks 20 meters to her left. Ranging shots, probing, trying to flush her out or force her to relocate. Kenna pressed herself flatter against the stone and waited. The fire shifted, walking closer to her position. Someone down there had good instincts. Another burst, this one close enough to spray her with rock fragments. She tasted blood where a chip had cut her lip. She had 2 choices: stay and risk being pinned down, or move and lose her firing position. Neither option was good. A third option occurred to her. Make them pay for every shot they took. She spotted the machine gun team, 2 men behind a natural barricade on the eastern slope. The gunner was focused on her general area, waiting for movement. His assistant was feeding the belt, keeping the weapon ready for sustained fire. 2,800 meters. Slightly closer than her previous shots, but a more difficult angle. Kenna did not hesitate. The rifle cracked, and the assistant gunner's head snapped back. Before the first man could react, she chambered another round and fired again. The gunner slumped over his weapon. Shots 11 and 12. 5 rounds remaining. The radio erupted with American cheers. She could hear soldiers shouting, their voices carrying across the valley. Whoever was on that ridge had just become a legend in real time. Reaper 2-6 to unknown sniper. That was a machine gun that had us pinned for 2 hours. I owe you a drink when this is over. Several drinks. All the drinks. Despite everything, Ken almost smiled. But the moment of levity vanished as quickly as it came. Movement at the enemy command position caught her attention. A vehicle, previously hidden in a ravine, was pulling into view. Technical, armed with a heavy weapon mounted in the bed. If that vehicle reached a firing position, it could tear through the American perimeter in minutes. She tracked it through the scope, calculating frantically. Moving target, varying speed, 3,000 meters, and increasing. The shot was beyond difficult. It was nearly impossible. The technical stopped. The crew dismounted, preparing to bring the mounted weapon to bear on the valley below. Kenna fired. Shot 13. The driver collapsed against the vehicle. She chambered immediately and fired again. Shot 14. The man reaching for the mounted weapon spun away, clutching his shoulder, then fell. 2 rounds remaining. The surviving crew abandoned the technical and fled. Kenna let them go. Ammunition was too precious to waste on targets that were no longer threats. In the valley below, Private Tomasz Kowalczyk was crying. He did not realize it until Sergeant Mercer shook his shoulder and asked if he was hit. No, he managed to say, "No, I'm fine. I just thought we were going to die." Mercer, a 20-year veteran who had seen more combat than most soldiers would see in 3 lifetimes, looked up at the northern ridge where their mysterious savior continued to hold back an army. "We might still die, kid," he said, "but whoever is up there is giving us a chance. That is more than we had an hour ago." Kowalczyk wiped his face and checked his rifle. "Then we better make it count." Above them, Kenna shifted position slightly, ignoring the throbbing agony of her infected arm, the grinding pain of her broken ribs, the fever that was slowly clouding her thoughts. 2 rounds remaining. Dozens of enemies still in the field. The math did not work, but math had never stopped her before. She found another target and began her calculations. The battle was not over yet. 2 rounds. Kenna stared at the rifle in her hands, then at the battlefield below. The enemy had regrouped, their initial panic giving way to grim determination. They knew they outnumbered the Americans. They knew that air support was not coming. All they had to do was overwhelm the sniper on the ridge, and the valley would be theirs. She watched the massing for a final push. 30 fighters, maybe more, gathering in the dead ground behind the southern ridge. They would come all at once from multiple directions, betting that one sniper could not stop them all. They were right. She could not stop them all, not with 2 rounds. But she could make those 2 rounds count. The enemy commander was visible now, a different man than the one she had killed earlier. He moved among his fighters with confidence, pointing toward the American positions, issuing orders. He was smart enough to stay partially concealed, using his men as cover, never presenting a clean shot for more than a second. Kenna waited. Patience was a sniper's greatest weapon, more valuable than any rifle. She had learned that lesson in training, reinforced it through 3 deployments, and now she applied it one final time. The commander turned to speak to someone behind him, and for one heartbeat, his chest was exposed. Shot 15. The bullet traveled for 4 long seconds before finding its home. The commander dropped, and the fighters around him froze in confusion. Their second leader in an hour, killed by a ghost they could not see. 1 round remaining. Kenna scanned for another target, but found herself hesitating. 1 bullet. She could kill 1 more enemy, and then she would be defenseless. The smart play was to save it for herself, a final option if they overran her position. Below, the radio crackled with Lieutenant Bright's voice. All Reaper elements. Enemy is massing for assault. Conserve ammunition. Make every shot count. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was softer. It has been an honor serving with you. She thinks they're going to die, Kenna realized. She's saying goodbye. The enemy began to move. Not a coordinated assault now, but a desperate charge, fighters breaking from cover and rushing toward the American perimeter. The defensive fire intensified, soldiers burning through their remaining ammunition, knowing that when the bullets ran out, it would come down to bayonets and bare hands. Kenna raised her rifle and searched for a target worthy of her final round. She found him at the base of her own ridge, a man climbing toward her position, moving with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years in these mountains. He carried no rifle, only a pistol at his hip and a knife on his belt. He was not coming to shoot her from a distance. He was coming to kill her with his hands. Even from 500 meters, she recognized him from the intelligence briefings. Rahim Khosravi, the warlord, the man whose nephew she had killed. He had come to finish this personally. Their eyes met across the distance, and Kenna saw no fear in his gaze. Only cold, patient hatred. He continued climbing, unhurried, confident that she would not waste her final bullet on him while his men were slaughtering her countrymen below. He was wrong. Kenna shifted her aim and fired. Shot 16. Khosravi jerked as the round took him in the shoulder, spinning him off balance. He caught himself against a rock, blood streaming down his arm, and looked up at her with something that might have been respect. Then he resumed climbing. The rifle was empty now. Kenna dropped it and drew the knife she had taken from the compound, the same blade she had used to escape, the same blade that had killed Khosravi's nephew. If he wanted to end this face-to-face, she would oblige him. But the shot had done more than wound him. It had shown his men that their leader was mortal, that the sniper on the ridge could reach anyone, anywhere. The assault faltered. Fighters who had been charging forward now hesitated, looking back toward where Khosravi had fallen. And in that moment of hesitation, a new sound filled the valley. Rotors. The unmistakable thunder of approaching helicopters. Kenna looked east and saw them coming over the mountains. 2 Apaches bristling with weapons, followed by a pair of Blackhawks. Someone at Warhorse had finally listened. Someone had sent help. The enemy broke. It happened all at once, the will to fight draining out of them as the helicopters roared overhead. Fighters who had been moments from overrunning the American position now scattered into the mountains, abandoning weapons, abandoning wounded, thinking only of escape. The Apaches pursued them with terrible efficiency, cannon fire echoing off the valley walls. The Blackhawks descended toward the American perimeter, doors already open, medics ready to deploy. Kenna watched it all from her position on the ridge, the knife still clutched in her trembling hand. She had done it. Against every odd, against every rational calculation, she had held the line long enough for help to arrive. Below, Lieutenant Bright's voice came over the radio, ragged with emotion. Warhorse Base, this is Reaper 2-6. QRF has arrived. Enemy is in full retreat. She paused, and Kenna could hear her struggling to maintain composure. We have 42 soldiers still breathing down here, and every single one of them owes their life to the sniper on that ridge. Whoever they are, wherever they came from, they saved us. They saved all of us. Kenna tried to stand, but her legs would not cooperate. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the battle was fading now, leaving only the pain and exhaustion she had been ignoring for hours. Her vision blurred. The infected arm had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, red streaks extending past her elbow toward her shoulder. She sank back against the rocks and pressed her brother's dog tags to her chest. I did it, Deo, she whispered. I saved them. The knife fell from her fingers as consciousness slipped away. The last thing she heard was the sound of helicopters growing closer and voices shouting her position. They had found her. She was going home. The first thing Kenna became aware of was the smell. antiseptic and clean linen, the unmistakable scent of a military medical facility. She tried to open her eyes, but the light was too bright, sending spikes of pain through her skull. "Easy, soldier." A woman's voice, calm and professional. "You have been out for almost 18 hours. Take it slow." Kenna forced her eyes open despite the pain. A nurse stood beside her bed, checking in 4-line that ran into her uninjured arm. Beyond her, Kenna could see the interior of a field hospital, rows of beds occupied by wounded soldiers, medical staff moving between them with quiet efficiency. "Where am I?" she managed to say, her voice a dry rasp. "Forward Operating Base Warhorse. You were airlifted from the ridge yesterday afternoon." The nurse offered a small smile. "You gave everyone quite a scare. The infection in your arm had gone septic. Another few hours and we would have lost you." Kenna looked down at her left arm, now wrapped in fresh bandages, and 4 drip-fed antibiotics directly into her system. Her ribs were bound, each breath still painful but manageable. She was alive. "The soldiers in the valley," she said. "The platoon. Did they make it?" The nurse's smile widened. 42 soldiers recovered, 11 wounded, 0 killed in action. "Thanks to you, from what I hear." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "You're something of a celebrity around here, specialist. The whole base is talking about the ghost sniper who appeared out of nowhere and single-handedly broke an enemy assault." Kenna closed her eyes. The faces of her convoy flashed through her mind. Corporal Whitmore, Sergeant Pelletier, Private First Class Okonkwo. They had not made it. She had not been able to save them. "The convoy," she said. "My unit. Is there any word about other survivors?" The nurse's expression shifted, becoming carefully neutral. "You should speak with your commanding officer about that. He has been informed that you are awake." Something in her tone made Kenna's stomach tighten. "What do you mean, my commanding officer? Who is in charge of Warhorse now?" The nurse hesitated. "Lieutenant Colonel Vickers assumed command 3 days ago, right after the convoy incident. He has been asking about you specifically." Kenna stared at her. Vickers, the man who had ignored her warning, the man whose arrogance had killed her entire convoy. He was in command of this base, and he had been asking about her. She needed information. She needed to understand what had happened while she was unconscious. "Is there anyone else who wants to see me?" she asked carefully. "Anyone from the platoon I helped in the valley?" The nurse nodded. "There's a Lieutenant Bright who has been checking on you every few hours. And a Sergeant First Class Achebe has been camped outside since you arrived. He says he knows you." Achebe. The name cut through the fog in Kenna's mind. Damon Achebe had been her brother's best friend, had served with Deo in the same unit. After her brother died, Achebe had transferred to Warhorse and quietly looked out for her, never making a big deal of it, just making sure she had someone watching her back. "Send Sergeant Achebe in," Kenna said. "Please." The nurse left, and a minute later, Damon Achebe pushed through the curtain surrounding her bed. He was a tall man, Nigerian-American like her, with kind eyes that currently held a mixture of relief and barely contained fury. "Kenna." He pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down heavily. "They told us you were dead. 3 days ago, the official report came through. Specialist Kenna O'Yellerin, killed in action during enemy ambush on Route Copper." Kenna frowned. "But I was not killed. I was captured. I escaped." Achebe leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "That is not what the after-action report says. According to Lieutenant Colonel Vickers, there were no survivors from the convoy. He certified the report himself. When I requested permission to lead a search and rescue team, he denied it, said it was too dangerous, that there was no point risking more lives for bodies." The words hit Kenna like physical blows. Vickers had not just ignored her warning. He had written her off as dead without even attempting to find her. He had refused to send help when she was out there fighting for her life. "Why?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Achebe's jaw tightened. "Because if you came back alive, you could tell everyone that you warned him about the ambush route. You could tell them that he ignored intelligence from his own sniper and got 11 soldiers killed." He looked at her with something like grief in his eyes. "He needed you to be dead, Kenna. A dead soldier cannot contradict an official report." Kenna lay back against the pillow, processing what she had just learned. Vickers had not merely been negligent. He had actively covered up his mistake by declaring her killed in action, by refusing to search for survivors, by burying the truth under paperwork and procedure. And now she was alive, and the truth was alive with her. "Does anyone else know," she asked, "about the report, about what really happened?" Lieutenant Bright has been asking questions. Achebe allowed himself a small smile. "Turns out, when you save 42 soldiers from certain death, people start paying attention to your story." She has been comparing the timeline, talking to other officers, putting pieces together. And she is not the only one. Kenna thought about the radio transmission she had heard, Bright's fury at being denied support, her bitter words about being written off as acceptable losses. The lieutenant had already suspected something was wrong. Now she had proof walking around in the form of a sniper who was supposed to be dead. "What happens now?" Kenna asked. Achebe stood, his expression hardening into something cold and determined. "Now you rest. You heal. And when you are ready, you tell the truth about what happened on Route Copper." He paused at the curtain. "Vickers thinks he buried his mistake with your convoy. He has no idea that the only witness just crawled out of the grave and saved half a platoon on the way." He left, and Kenna lay alone with her thoughts. The pain in her arm and ribs seemed distant now, overwhelmed by a different kind of fire burning in her chest. Vickers wanted her dead. He had left her to die in the mountains and lied to cover his tracks. He was about to learn just how badly he had underestimated her. 2 days passed before Kenna was strong enough to leave the medical facility. The antibiotics had beaten back the infection, though her arm would carry scars for the rest of her life. Her ribs were healing, the pain now a dull ache rather than a sharp fire. She was weak, exhausted, and running on something deeper than physical strength. Lieutenant Yolanda Bright came to see her on the morning of the 3rd day. Kenna had been expecting a battle-hardened officer, someone worn down by years of combat. Instead, she found a young woman not much older than herself, with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. Bright moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to measure every action, every word. "Specialist O'Yellerin." Bright pulled a chair close and sat down without asking permission. "I have been wanting to meet you since they carried you off that ridge." "Lieutenant." Kenna tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the pull in her ribs. "I heard your transmissions during the battle. You kept your people together when everything was falling apart." Bright's expression flickered with something complicated. "I kept them together long enough for you to save them. 42 soldiers went home to their families because of what you did." She paused. "But that is not why I am here." Kenna waited. "I have been asking questions," Bright continued. "About you, about the convoy, about why a sniper who was supposedly killed in action 3 days earlier showed up on a mountain ridge to save my platoon." She leaned forward. "The official after-action report says your convoy was ambushed and all personnel were killed. It says there were no survivors, no possibility of rescue." Lieutenant Colonel Vickers signed that report himself. "He was wrong." Bright's eyes narrowed. "I do not think he was wrong. I think he was lying." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and handed it to Kenna. "This is a copy of the communication log from the day of your convoy ambush. 3 separate requests for search and rescue were submitted by Sergeant First Class Achebe. All 3 were denied by Vickers personally, citing unacceptable risk to personnel." Kenna unfolded the paper and scanned the entries. The timestamps told the story. Achebe had requested a SAR within 2 hours of the ambush. Vickers had denied it within minutes. The second request came 4 hours later, denied just as quickly. The third request, submitted the following morning, included a note from Achebe stating that satellite imagery showed possible movement near the ambush site. Vickers had denied that one too, adding a handwritten notation that read, "No further SCR requests will be entertained. All convoy personnel confirmed Kia. Matter closed." "He did not even look," Kenna said quietly. "He just decided we were dead and moved on." Bright nodded. "It gets worse. I pulled the intelligence reports from the week before your convoy. There were 3 separate warnings about increased enemy activity on Route Copper. One of them came from you." Kenna remembered standing in the briefing room, raising her hand, trying to tell Vickers what she had seen in the terrain analysis. The dismissive look on his face. The comment about female intuition. He ignored the warnings, she said. All of them. And then he buried the evidence. Bright took back the paper and folded it carefully. If you had stayed dead, no one would have ever known. The report would have stood. Vickers would have continued his career with a tragic but unavoidable loss on his record instead of a catastrophic failure caused by his own arrogance. Kenna looked at the lieutenant, seeing the anger beneath her professional composure. Why are you telling me this? Why are you involved? Bright was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was harder than before. Because 3 days ago, my platoon requested air support and QRF 4 times. For times we were told that assets were unavailable, that we were not a priority. She met Kenna's eyes. The helicopters that eventually saved us were not sent by Warhorse Command. They were diverted from another mission by a colonel at regional headquarters who heard our transmissions and overrode local authority. Vickers was going to let your platoon die too. Yes. Bright stood, her movements sharp with controlled fury. The same man who killed your convoy by ignoring intelligence tried to kill my platoon by denying support. And he is still in command of this base, still making decisions about who lives and who dies. Kenna pushed herself out of bed, ignoring the protest from her healing body. What do we do? Bright smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We tell the truth. I have already contacted the Inspector General's office at Regional Command. An investigator is arriving tomorrow. She paused. They will want to interview you, specialist. They will want to know everything that happened, from the moment you warned Vickers about Route Copper to the moment you put 16 rounds into enemy fighters from 3 kilometers away. I will tell them everything. Good. Bright moved toward the door, then stopped. There's one more thing you should know. Vickers has requested a meeting with you this afternoon. Officially, it is to welcome you back and commend your actions in the valley. And unofficially? Unofficially, I think you want to find out what you know and what you plan to do about it. Bright's expression hardened. Be careful, specialist. A man who would leave soldiers to die to protect his career is capable of almost anything. She left, and Kenna stood alone in the medical bay, her mind racing. In a few hours, she would face the man who had killed her convoy, abandoned her to die, and tried to bury the truth. She would look into his eyes and see the face of everything wrong with a system that valued careers over lives. She walked to the small mirror mounted on the wall and studied her reflection. The woman who looked back was thinner than she remembered, with dark circles under her eyes and fresh scars on her arm. But her gaze was steady, her jaw set with determination. Vickers thought he had buried his mistakes. He thought the dead could not speak. He was about to learn otherwise. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Vickers had an office that reflected his ambition. Flags stood in the corners, certificates lined the walls, and his desk was positioned so that anyone entering would have to approach him like a supplicant approaching a throne. He was a man who understood the power of image, of perception, of controlling the narrative. Kenna stood in the doorway and studied him before he noticed her presence. He was reviewing documents, his reading glasses perched on his nose, looking every inch the competent commander. No one watching him would guess that he had left soldiers to die and lied about it afterward. Specialist O'Yelleran. Vickers looked up with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Please come in. Close the door. Kenna entered, but did not close the door. She stopped 3 feet from his desk and stood at attention, her gaze fixed on a point just above his head. The posture was regulation, but the message was clear. She was not here as a subordinate seeking approval. She was here as a soldier facing an enemy. Vickers studied her for a moment, then shrugged and gestured to a chair. At ease, specialist. Sit down. This is not a formal proceeding. I prefer to stand, sir. Something flickered in his expression. Irritation, quickly suppressed. Suit yourself. He leaned back in his chair, adopting a casual posture that was clearly rehearsed. I wanted to personally welcome you back and commend you for your actions in the valley. 16 confirmed kills at extreme range. You saved an entire platoon. That is the kind of performance that earns recognition. Thank you, sir. Vickers waited, clearly expecting her to say more. When she remained silent, he continued, I have already submitted a recommendation for a Silver Star. Given the circumstances, I think we can expect approval within the month. He smiled again, the expression of a man offering a gift. You're going to be famous, specialist. The sniper who came back from the dead to save 42 Americans. It is quite a story. Yes, sir. It is quite a story. Vickers' smile faltered. He had expected gratitude, perhaps even tears. Instead, he was facing a wall of cold professionalism that gave him nothing to work with. He changed tactics, leaning forward with an expression of concern. I understand you have been through a terrible ordeal. The convoy, your capture, the escape. He shook his head with practiced sympathy. If you need time, counseling, anything at all, just let me know. We take care of our people here at Warhorse. Kenna let the silence stretch for 3 heartbeats before responding. Sir, I have a question about the convoy. Vickers' eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Of course. What would you like to know? The morning of the ambush, I raised concerns about Route Copper during the mission briefing. I cited intelligence reports indicating increased enemy activity in that sector. She kept her voice level, emotionless. Do you remember your response, sir? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Vickers' face went carefully blank. I remember there was some discussion about the route. Ultimately, I made a command decision based on the totality of available information. Your exact words were that you do not make tactical decisions based on female intuition, sir. You dismissed my warning and ordered the convoy to proceed on the original route. Vickers stood slowly, his casual demeanor evaporating. Specialist, I understand you have been through trauma. Memory can play tricks after an experience like yours. I would encourage you to focus on your recovery rather than relitigating command decisions that were made with the best available intelligence. Kenna reached into her pocket and produced a folded paper. This is a copy of the intelligence summary from the week before the convoy. It includes 3 separate warnings about Route Copper, including one that I personally submitted. She placed it on his desk. It also includes a transcript of the mission briefing where I raised those concerns and you dismissed them. Vickers did not look at the paper. Where did you get this? Lieutenant Bright has been very thorough in her research, sir. The mask finally cracked. Vickers' face flushed red, his jaw tightening with barely contained fury. Lieutenant Bright should focus on her own command rather than involving herself in matters that do not concern her. 11 soldiers died because you ignored warnings, sir. 42 more almost died when you denied support to a platoon under fire. Kenna met his eyes directly. I would say that concerns everyone on this base. Vickers moved around his desk, stopping inches from her face. His voice dropped to a low hiss. You have no idea what you're doing, specialist. I have 23 years in this army. I have connections at levels you cannot imagine. If you think some junior enlisted soldier can walk in here and threaten my career, you are badly mistaken. I am not threatening anything, sir. I am telling the truth. The truth is whatever I say it is. Vickers jabbed a finger at her chest. That after-action report is official record. Your fairy tale about warnings and ignored intelligence is just the rambling of a traumatized soldier. He smiled, but it was the smile of a predator. Who do you think they will believe? A lieutenant colonel with 2 decades of service, or a specialist who spent 3 days wandering the mountains in a fever dream? A voice came from the doorway. They will believe the evidence. Vickers spun around. Lieutenant Bright stood in the open door, and she was not alone. Beside her was a woman in army dress uniform, wearing the insignia of the Inspector General's office. Behind them stood Sergeant Achebe, and behind him, a crowd of soldiers from Bright's platoon. Lieutenant Colonel Vickers. The IG officer stepped forward, her expression professionally neutral. I am Major Catherine Reinhold from the Inspector General's office. I have some questions about the Route Copper convoy incident and subsequent after-action report. She glanced at Kenna. I have also been provided with documentation suggesting significant discrepancies between the official record and witness testimony. Vickers' face had gone pale. This is highly irregular. I should have been notified before any investigation. You were notified, sir, 3 hours ago. Major Reinhold's tone suggested she was not impressed. You were also advised to make yourself available for questioning. Instead, you scheduled a private meeting with the primary witness. She looked at Kenna. Specialist O'Yelleran, are you willing to provide a formal statement? Kenna straightened. Yes, ma'am. I am ready to tell everything. Behind the IG officer, Private Kowalczyk caught her eye. The young soldier she had talked through the battle, whose life she had saved with her words as much as her rifle, gave her a small nod of encouragement. The truth had arrived, and Marcus Vickers was about to learn that some things could not be buried. The investigation moved swiftly. Major Reinhold conducted interviews throughout the day, methodically building a case that grew more damning with each testimony. Soldiers from Kenna's convoy who had survived the initial ambush but died in captivity were now represented by communication records, intelligence reports, and the damning timeline of ignored warnings. Lieutenant Bright provided her own account of the battle in the valley, including recordings of her repeated requests for support and the dismissive responses from Warhorse Command. Sergeant Achebe presented his 3 denied SAR requests, each one time-stamped and annotated with Vickers' curt refusals. By evening, Vickers had been relieved of command, pending formal charges. Kenna watched from across the compound as military police escorted him from the headquarters building. He walked with his head high, refusing to show weakness, but she could see the defeat in the set of his shoulders. 23 years of service, and it had all collapsed in a single day because he could not admit he had been wrong. She felt no satisfaction. 11 soldiers from her convoy were still dead. Nothing could bring them back. Specialist O'Yelleran. Kenna turned to find Private Kowalczyk approaching, his young face uncertain. He stopped a few feet away, standing in an awkward approximation of attention. At ease, Private. Kenna managed a small smile. You do not have to be formal with me. Kowalczyk relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained serious. I wanted to thank you. Properly, I mean, during the battle, when everything was falling apart, I heard Lieutenant Bright talking to you on the radio. She told us someone was up there, shooting for us, and I thought it had to be a whole fire team at least. He shook his head. When I found out it was one person, one soldier who was supposed to be dead already, I could not believe it. I was just doing my job. No. Kowalczyk's voice firmed. You were dying on that ridge. The medics told us about the infection, the broken ribs, everything you went through just to get there. You could have kept going, reached the FOB, saved yourself. Instead, you stopped to save us. He swallowed hard. I'm 19 years old, specialist. I have a mom back in Wisconsin who does not know how close she came to getting a folded flag. Because of you, I get to call her tomorrow and tell her I am okay. Kenna did not trust herself to speak. She reached out and gripped his shoulder briefly, a gesture that said more than words could. Kowalczyk nodded, understanding. I will let you be. I just needed you to know. He turned to leave, then paused. The whole platoon feels the same way. 42 of us, and we all owe you everything. Whenever you need anything, we are here. He walked away, and Kenna stood alone in the fading light, processing emotions she had kept buried since the ambush. The grief she had not allowed herself to feel. The rage at Vickers that she had channeled into cold professionalism. The exhaustion of carrying her brother's memory through every step of her escape. Footsteps approached, and she recognized them before turning. Damon Achebe moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. How are you holding up? He asked quietly. I do not know yet. Kenna watched the last light fade from the sky. I spent 4 days trying to survive, then 2 days trying to expose the truth. Now that it is over, I am not sure what I am supposed to feel. Achebe was quiet for a moment. Your brother would be proud of you. The words hit her like a physical blow. She had been carrying Deo's memory since his death, wearing his dog tags, following his path into the army, trying to honor his sacrifice. But she had never stopped to consider whether she had succeeded. You think so? I know so. Achebe turned to face her. Deo talked about you all the time. His brilliant little sister who was going to do something amazing. He believed in you more than anyone I have ever known. He reached out and gently touched the dog tags visible at her collar. He would have moved heaven and earth to be here right now, to tell you himself. Kenna's vision blurred with tears she had been holding back for years. She had joined the army to honor her brother, but somewhere along the way, it had become about proving herself, about fighting against a system that constantly underestimated her. She had forgotten that Deo had never needed her to prove anything. He had simply loved her. "I miss him," she said, the words barely audible. "I know." Achebe pulled her into a brief embrace, the kind of hug an older brother might give. "So do I. But he is still here, Kenna. He is in those dog tags, in your training, in every shot you took from that ridge. You carry him with you everywhere." They stood together as darkness settled over the base. In the distance, Kenna could see the lights of the medical facility where soldiers from Bright's platoon were still recovering. 42 lives that would continue because she had chosen to fight. Tomorrow there would be more interviews, more paperwork, more official proceedings. There would be a medal ceremony at some point, recognition she neither wanted nor felt she deserved. There would be questions about her future, about where she went from here. But tonight, there was only this moment, the quiet of a forward operating base, the presence of a friend who had known her brother, the weight of dog tags against her chest. Kenna reached up and pressed her palm against the metal. The tags were warm from her body heat, almost alive. "I did it, Deo," she whispered. "I made it home." Somewhere in the darkness, she could almost hear her brother's voice, gentle and proud. "I know, little sister. I always knew you would." The ceremony took place 3 weeks later at Forward Operating Base Warhorse. The base had been transformed for the occasion, with chairs arranged in neat rows facing a small stage where the American flag hung beside the unit colors. Soldiers filled every seat, with more standing along the perimeter, all of them present to witness something rare. Kenna stood at attention in her dress uniform, her heart pounding despite her best efforts to remain calm. The Silver Star medal gleamed in Major General Catherine Shaw's hands as the general read the citation aloud. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States. Specialist Kenna O'Yellerin, having escaped enemy captivity despite serious injuries, discovered an American platoon under siege by numerically superior forces. With complete disregard for her own safety and physical condition, Specialist O'Yellerin engaged enemy combatants at distances exceeding 2,900 meters, achieving 16 confirmed kills and disrupting enemy command structure. Her actions directly resulted in the survival of 42 American soldiers." General Shaw paused, looking at Kenna with something like wonder in her eyes. "The official language cannot capture what you did, Specialist. You were dying on that ridge. You had every reason to save yourself. Instead, you chose to save others." She pinned the medal to Kenna's chest, and the assembled soldiers erupted in applause. Kenna saw Lieutenant Bright in the front row, clapping with tears streaming down her face. Sergeant Achebe stood beside her, his expression one of fierce pride. Private Kowalczyk was there too, along with every surviving member of the platoon she had saved. The general stepped back and rendered a salute. Kenna returned it crisply, holding the position until Shaw lowered her hand. The ceremony continued with additional commendations. Lieutenant Bright received a Bronze Star for her leadership under fire. Several soldiers from her platoon were recognized for their actions during the battle. Through it all, Kenna stood at the side of the stage, watching faces she had come to know over the past weeks. When the formal proceedings ended, the gathering transformed into something less official. Soldiers approached Kenna in small groups, shaking her hand, thanking her, sharing stories of what they had experienced in the valley. She heard accounts of the battle from perspectives she had never considered, moments of fear and courage that had unfolded while she was focused on her scope. A young woman approached, wearing the insignia of a specialist like Kenna. She was perhaps 20 years old, with nervous energy radiating from every movement. "Specialist O'Yellerin? I am Specialist Rivera. I just arrived at Warhorse last week." She hesitated, then pushed forward. "I am training to be a sniper. When I heard what you did, I knew I had to meet you." Kenna studied her, seeing echoes of her younger self in the woman's eager expression. "What made you want to be a sniper?" "Rivera Stratenth. I want to protect people. I want to be good enough to make the shot when it matters." The words resonated with something deep in Kenna's chest. She remembered asking herself the same question years ago, remembered her brother's patient instruction, remembered the long path that had led her to that ridge overlooking the valley. Being a sniper is not about making the shot, Kenna said slowly. It is about being willing to take the shot when no one else can. It is about carrying the weight of lives in your hands and not letting that weight crush you. She met Rivera's eyes. It is about showing up when everyone else has given up. Rivera nadit salimli. Will you teach me? Kenna considered the request. 3 weeks ago, she had been focused solely on survival, on exposing the truth, on honoring her brother's memory. She had not thought about what came next, about what her life would look like after the dust settled. But looking at this young soldier, she saw possibility, a chance to pass on what Deo had given her, a chance to shape the next generation of warriors who would protect the innocent and stand against injustice. I will teach you what I can, Kenna said. But remember this, the rifle is just a tool. What matters is what you carry in here. She tapped her chest. Courage, integrity, the willingness to do what is right even when it costs you everything. Rivera's face lit up with gratitude. Thank you, specialist. I will not let you down. She hurried away, and Kenna watched her go with a faint smile. Achebe appeared at her shoulder. Already recruiting the next generation? Someone has to. Kenna touched the metal on her chest, then the dog tags beneath her uniform. Deo taught me. Now I teach others. That is how we keep going. They stood together as the crowd began to disperse. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, beyond those peaks, Rahim Khosravi was still alive, still nursing his wounded shoulder and his wounded pride. Someday, that unfinished business would demand resolution. But not today. Today was for honoring the living and remembering the dead. Today was for gratitude and healing and hope. Lieutenant Bright approached, her bronze star gleaming beside her other decorations. She extended her hand, and Kenna shook it firmly. I never got to say this properly, Bright said. When I heard your voice on that radio, when I realized someone was actually fighting for us, I thought I was hallucinating. You gave us hope when we had none left. You gave me a reason to keep shooting, Kenna replied. We saved each other. Bright smiled. I suppose we did. She glanced at the setting sun. What will you do now? They are offering you stateside assignments, instructor positions, anything you want. Kenna considered the question. She thought about the quiet life that awaited her back home, the safety and comfort of training facilities far from combat. She thought about her mother, who had already lost one child to this war and nearly lost another. Then she thought about soldiers like Rivera, young and eager and needing guidance. She thought about platoons that might someday find themselves pinned down, waiting for help that might not come. She thought about the weight of her brother's dog tags and the promise they represented. I'm staying, she said. There is still work to do. Bright nodded as if she had expected nothing less. Then I am glad to have you, Specialist O'Yellerin. Welcome to Warhorse. Kenna looked out at the mountains where she had nearly died, where she had found something worth living for. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be more battles, more losses, more moments when everything seemed impossible. But she had learned something on that ridge, something that no training could teach and no medal could represent. She had learned that one person in the right place at the right time, with enough courage, could change everything. If you connected with this story, drop a comment about what resonated most with you, or share if you have witnessed similar courage in real life. She touched her brother's dog tags one last time, feeling his presence wrapped around her heart. I'm home, Deo, she whispered, and I'm exactly where I am supposed to be.